name is Chris Neby. I'm the creator of the Mysterious China series. Today, I'd like to address the issue of the Diaoyu Islands. These islands have recently become a catalyst for Pacific aggression. The Diaoyu Island conflict is one of those disturbing relics of post-imperial colonialism which continue to haunt Africa, the Middle East, and Asia to this day. In this particular case, it is Imperial Japan, which in 1895, after the First Sino-Japanese War, annexed the Diaoyu Islands. These islands have been Chinese territory since ancient times.
The issue of the Diaoyu Islands is best understood in the context of a comprehensive history between China and Japan, which will be addressed in chronological order. While much of this history is disastrous and at times horrifying, the purpose of this film is to encourage reconciliation. Geographically separated by only a narrow stretch of ocean, China has strongly influenced the Japanese culture. Despite introducing Zen Buddhism, the arts of writing, philosophy, architecture, and law to Japan, the relations between the two countries have been tragic since time immemorial. The first recorded armed conflict between China and Japan took place in 663 AD during the Tang Dynasty in the Battle of Bekgong, in which Japan attacked and was defeated by China. This set the stage for future tensions. Maritime trade between China and Japan has always been important. The ports of Ningbo and Hangzhou in Zhejiang province had the most direct commercial links with Japan. Japanese pirates were a constant problem, not only for Chinese and Korean traders, but for the Japanese as well. At that time, Japan was also ravaged by civil wars. Subsequently, the Ming Dynasty, which ruled from 1358 to 1644, decreed that Ningbo was the only port where Japanese-Chinese trading could take place. Toyotomi Hideyoshi was one of the great unifiers of Japan. He wanted to conquer China. When Korea, at that time a vassal state of China, refused to permit Japan passage through their territory, Toyotomi Hideyoshi invaded Korea and eventually Manchuria in 1592. But the Japanese were unable to keep their supply lines open because Korean guerrilla forces continued disrupting them. Subsequently, the Japanese were forced to accept a truce in 1593. It lasted about 4 years, after which Hideyoshi once again attacked. This time, the Chinese and Koreans were well prepared and again defeated Japan. The frustrated Japanese troops retreated from the Korean peninsula, obliterating cities and slaughtering civilians as they went. In 1633, in order to once and for all ward off foreign influences in Japan, the Tokugawa shogunate decided to abolish all international trade and have no more direct links with the outside world. In China, defending Hideyoshi's second invasion had drained the treasury of the Ming Dynasty and left it vulnerable against the Manchus, who eventually ended the Ming Dynasty and established the Qing Dynasty in 1644. During the early Meiji Restoration era of Imperial Japan, the Meiji Emperor fought with China over control of the Ryukyu Islands, which were an independent kingdom and vassal state of China. In 1879, Imperial Japan annexed the Ryukyu Islands and established the Okinawa Prefecture. 15 years later, the First Sino-Japanese War began in 1894, not only over the control of Korea, which was still a vassal state of China, but also because Japan wanted to conquer Manchuria yet again. Strategically located and rich in natural resources, Manchuria had been a battleground throughout the centuries, as China, Japan, and Russia fought bitterly for control over it. The history of this land between the Yellow Sea and the Amur River, which forms its border with Russia, has been written in blood and tears. After more than 6 months of fierce fighting with thousands of civilians massacred by Japanese invaders, the weak Qing dynasty agreed to a ceasefire. On April 17, 1895, in the Treaty of Shimonoseki, the Qing dynasty was forced to recognize the independence of Korea, cede to Japan in perpetuity the Liaodong Peninsula as well as the Penghu Islands and the island of Taiwan. In addition, the Qing dynasty had to pay a huge ransom in cash. At that time, Imperial Japan also annexed the Diaoyu Islands as spoils of war and immediately incorporated the uninhabited islands as part of the Okinawa Prefecture under the sovereignty of Japan. This was done even though the Diaoyu Islands had historically been Chinese territory and the annexation was never part of the Shimonoseki Treaty. Within China, the devastating defeat by Japan and the acceptance of the humiliating Shimonoseki Treaty, along with many foreign nations vying to colonize China, became a catalyst for political change. The Righteous Harmony Society, a Chinese nationalist movement opposing foreign influence and imperial colonialism, started the Boxer Rebellion, which lasted from 1899 to 1901. The Boxers refused to accept the fact that the proud, ancient civilization of the Middle Kingdom had been brought to its knees by foreign gunboats, British opium, and Japanese military oppression. The Imperial Colonial Nations Alliance defeated the Boxer Uprising and summarily executed all those suspected of being Boxer sympathizers. The Russian Empire and the Qing dynasty had maintained a long peace since the 1689 Nerchinsk Treaty. However, Tsarist forces of Alexander II, the Liberator, took advantage of the decaying Qing dynasty by imposing the 1858 Aigun Treaty and the 1860 Convention of Peking, in which China had to cede territory in Manchuria, much of which is still held by Russia to this day. The 1904-05 Russo-Japanese War was the first great war of the 20th century. It grew out of the rival imperial ambitions of the Russian and the Japanese empires over control of Manchuria and Korea. Russia also wanted a warm water port with access to the Pacific Ocean. The Japanese defeated the Russians in a series of battles on land and at sea, pushing the Russians to retreat north of the Amur River. In a peace treaty, Imperial Russia recognized Korea as part of the Japanese sphere of influence and agreed to evacuate parts of Manchuria. Continued intense rivalry among Great Britain, Russia, the United States, Australia, Germany, France, Austria, Italy, and Imperial Japan prevented China from being carved up into many separate colonies by these allied nations, known as the Imperial Powers. Each vied to enlarge its colonial holdings, but their infighting resulted only in an even more chaotic status quo. The 10th imperial colonial power in China was Portugal, which controlled Macau. Contrary to the other imperial colonial powers, Portugal enjoyed friendly relations with China. For mutual benefit, the Ming dynasty had leased Macau to Portugal in 1558 as a trading port. In 1999, sovereignty over Macau was transferred back to China, and since then this former trading port has become an international gambling and entertainment center, surpassing Las Vegas in profits. But the continuous invasions by foreign imperial colonial powers in the 19th century had dragged the Middle Kingdom into an abyss of suffering and backwardness, which in turn intensified the Chinese people's yearning for peace and harmony. The resentment against the imperial colonial powers and the sense of historic injustice continued to fester and inspired revolutionary forces within China. The weakened Qing dynasty continued to disintegrate during the Xinhai Revolution, finally collapsing after the Wuchang Uprising of 1911. Having ruled China since 1644, the Qing dynasty was replaced by the Republic of China, which was formally established on January 1st, 1912. This ended over 2,000 years of imperial rule in China. The much-revered revolutionary Dr. Sun Yat-sen was the first president and founding father of the Republic of China. He received his medical degree from the University of Hong Kong and had extensively traveled in the West. Dr. Sun's political philosophy is known as the three principles of the people: nationalism, democracy, and the people's livelihood. Dr. Sun passed away in 1925. His mausoleum is a testament to the great legacy he left behind. It is situated at the foot of Purple Mountain in Nanjing, the capital of Jiangsu Province. An interesting example of how alliances were short-lived, opportunistic, and constantly shift between the imperial colonial nations occurred during World War I. Right after World War I had started, Japan and Great Britain joined forces in 1914, attacking and occupying the German colony and port city of Tsingtao on the Yellow Sea. Japanese imperialistic ambitions steadily increased during the 1920s, focusing on the complete conquest of Manchuria. But the powerful Chinese warlord, Zhang Zhou stood in Japan's way. As a result, in 1928, the Japanese assassinated Zhang Zhou by bombing his train. Imperial Japan's military aggressions continued and culminated in the 1931 Mukden incident, which was the explosion of a railway track. The Japanese had engineered this so-called act of sabotage, using it as a pretext to invade all of Manchuria, and immediately established the puppet state of Manchukuo with Pu Yi, the last emperor of the Qing dynasty, as its sovereign. In Manchukuo,